Hello and welcome, everyone. I hope everyone is having a great Tuesday evening. I'm excited to be with all of you this evening. For those that might not know me, I'm Ruby Garcia. I'm a leadership and life coach, DE&I champion, and the founder of Ruby Garcia Coaching. I have the pleasure every week coming to you and bringing on different guests and talking about some of the issues that impact us as Latinos. And this week, I'm just excited to dive into this conversation. I have three amazing guests with me, and I'll have them introduce themselves a little more in just a moment. But tonight's topic is all about mobilizing our community, mobilizing the Latino community for change. And you'll hear a little more about what's going on in Green Bay, Wisconsin. And although we're talking about Green Bay today, this is not isolated there. This is going on all across the country, and it's important that our voices be heard. And that's why, we're bringing the conversation to LinkedIn and YouTube and Facebook so that, more people will hear about this and think about what's going on in your community and how do you get involved. So before we make further introductions, I'm just going to share a little more about what's going on. So we have we have three Latina leaders here. One can be with us tonight, who are part of the Northeast Wisconsin Latino Education Task Force, also known as NEWLET. And this is formed by members of different Latino organizations that are coming together as a collective to use their influence to ensure that any decisions that are going on regarding their school districts, low enrollment, budget shortfalls, and facility repairs don't lead to disproportionate impact on people of color. And so it's really important to know that the Green Bay School District is 60% diverse, with over 30% of those, the population being of Latino descent. And it's also, despite the decline in overall enrollment, the Latino population increased by 400 since 2020. And so, and maybe this doesn't make sense yet, but it will in just a second here. So before we go into that, and feel free, anyone who's listening, drop in comments in the chat. Let me know where you're listening in from. We'd love to, bring your comments, and feel free. This is supposed to be engaging and interactive. So of course, ask questions or, share your experience or put your comments on there. Let us know where you're listening from. But while we're doing that, I just want to give a moment for everyone to introduce themselves. So if you could just tell me who you are, what is it that you do? Tell us a little bit about your professional and cultural background and what has brought you here today. And Gabby, you want to kick us off?
Sure. So my name is Gabriela Parra. I am an immigration attorney here in the state of Wisconsin. So I represent clients from all over the country, all over the world, actually, and all over the state. I am a first-generation graduate. I was born in California, and, my first 15 years, I identified as Chicana. After navigating a predominantly white space for several years, I ended up giving up that identity. And now at the age of 35, going back to my search for my Chicana identity. So right now I'm in that search. That's how I identify with my Latino roots.
All right, I'll go next. So hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Amanda Garcia. I'm the executive director at Casalba Melanie, which is a Hispanic resource center in the greater Green Bay area. How I identify culturally, I think that has changed over time. I remember in elementary school, I just said I was Mexican. That's all I knew. My parents are immigrants from Mexico. So I identified as Mexican, and then over time, I think that shifted to Latina or Mexican American, depending on the space that I was in. And it's interesting because just hearing Gabi's trajectory, I think for me, I didn't identify as Chicana until I went to college, because I started reading about Latin American authors. I started learning more about my heritage and the history of the just Chicanos in the US, which was not taught to me in the public school system. So I had to learn a lot of my own history. And now I think depending on the space that I'm in, I either identify as Latina, Mexican, or Chicana.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. My name is Dr. Grazia Villar-Roel, and I'm a professor of political science and international studies at St. Norbert College in Wisconsin. And I am originally from Bolivia, from South America, but I've been back and forth in my life. We came when I was 5 originally, as my dad came to study in the United States. And then we went back, and then I came back for college, and that is how I have stayed in the United States since then. I think one of the things that has been really important for me, because I have gone back and forth, is understanding that going back and forth and how you feel on either side and how you bridge the two cultures. It's always been very important to me. But I also, because I teach international relations and I've taught Latin American politics, it's been really important also to understand how Latin Americans are Latin Americans in their own countries, but then come to the U.S. and they become Hispanic, right? And I think that is the change of identity. I think that we heard Amanda talk about is that I used to tell my students, you go for 300 years fighting wars to separate from Spain, and then for another 100 years to separate from each other. But then you come to the U.S. and you're all Hispanics again. And so, but it's an interesting process, but it's real, and you do feel it if you live here long enough. You do feel that connection, and that is what has happened to me as well. As I might have identified more as Bolivian, and I still do, but I do feel very strongly Hispanic and Latina, and I think that has been something that I have always also communicated in my teaching and with my students. So I think that is part of my trajectory.
Yeah, and it's amazing to see 3 strong Latinas here with us tonight. I always feel so empowered when I'm around other Latinas, and I think it's a great example of what's possible too, because it's growing up, I didn't know a single Latina attorney or professor, much less. I mean, or I didn't, any of these roles. There were so few of us in it, right? Like I know with attorneys, it's only I think less than 2%, right, Gabi, that are Latina attorneys, and so it's great to have that representation and to see people using their influence for good. So I want to dive into a little bit about what's going on in the Green Bay area. So Amanda, can you kind of set the stage for us? Tell us a little about what's going on, and then we're going to get into kind of what it means to mobilize, and how do you practice self-care and collective care, and how do you deal with some of the internal struggles that go on as a Latina navigating predominantly white spaces. But first, give us kind of a backdrop of what's going on there.
Yeah, so before I get into the facilities task force, I have to say that my experience is I'm often the only Latina in the room, or one of very few Latinos or Latinas in the room. So I have also navigated white spaces for many years, and I think that's an experience that people of color can identify with. But with the facilities task force, so I was approached to join the Green Bay Public Schools Facilities Task Force. I think it was right before January, so I think right after the holidays. And we started meeting in January of this year, and we were tasked with trying to find solutions to the budget concerns that our district is facing, which I think is not unique to our city or our state. I think many districts are facing similar issues. And also declining enrollment, which we heard from the consulting firm that was also an issue. So we came together. It was community members from different areas, different sectors. So some were nonprofits, some were landlords, some were very few were from an education background. And we were told that we had to come together and find a solution to the issues that we were facing. So we were all volunteers, giving our time to this task. So we were told through this process that we only had to look at conditions of buildings, and really right-sizing our district, or optimizing the use of space, which means that ultimately we were going to have to close buildings as an option. We were also told that a lot of the budget is actually I think over 80% of the district budget is actually with salaries and staff. So they told us, instead of cutting staff, it's an easier solution to close buildings and make shifts that way. So we were giving a lot of information on budget, a lot of information on the conditions of buildings, and a lot of enrollment and capacity of each classroom and building, which ultimately led to Schema 12.1. So, I asked questions about demographics, there were other questions raised through the process about public opinion, about transportation, about programming and students with special needs, because closing a building is not just closing a building, right? You are affecting or impacting students and families, and how are they going to absorb those changes? So I specifically was thinking of Latino families and how they were going to react to these impacts if their community school was closed. Some of our students walk to school, we'll get into other factors, but when we were asking those questions, we were told just to focus on facilities and budget and enrollment, and that they were going to figure out the other factors later on. But in my mind, all of those factors should have been considered right away. With the decision that is this big and causing this much change. So that's really what started the whole process. I started questioning the other factors and questioning how this was going to impact our community. And in the end, I wasn't completely happy with the final schema that was proposed. So among talking to other leaders, we had several concerns, and that's where the whole process started. I might hand it over to Grazia to maybe explain what continued from there.
Yes, I just want to say is that I actually came from it from a little bit of a different angle because I was actually writing about the fact that Green Bay is going to become a majority minority community in the future.
Okay.
But I was already looking at it from the Green Bay Public Schools. So I was going to write an article for Envision Greater Green Bay, I'm on the board of Envision Greater Green Bay, which is an organization that looks at the future and foresight analysis and works with strategic foresight. So I was very interested in the public schools for that in the Green Bay Public Schools. So when I first saw the actual, final two schemas that they came up with, or actually there were several before there were final two, but I looked at it before that, and I saw the fact that several of the schools were going to close, but several of them were also majority BIPOC and majority Latino schools. I was really concerned. So I called some people in the public schools and other places asking about questions about it, because I could tell because I had done the analysis already about which schools were more diverse and which ones were not. I had done, the entire demographic analysis of that already. So once I realized that that was the way it was, I asked to be on the task force, but I found out that it was too late for me to go on the task force because they were already getting to the point of wrapping it up. From that point on, I talked with Amanda first, and then I talked also with other people, and actually that is how we started also, right? As we started talking about it, and I know Gabi came in from a little bit of a different angle there as well, but I think it was this realization, especially having the demographic study done, that there was a real big problem that was not being discussed in the task force because they had not been given any of the demographic data. And if you
let me ask you this really quick. Just let me pause and interject here. So do you, and I know it's hard. I don't want to make assumptions. But I'm wondering, because the school district board is mostly white or all white, is that correct?
There's one Native American, right?
Okay. So do you think this was by accident, like an oversight of just not even considering because it doesn't occur to them, or,
I think probably the Green Bay Public School administration knows the demographics very well, but because they have to deal with it on a daily basis. But I would say that the board probably did not, and especially they have also brand new members that might have not known that. I mean, I know for a fact they didn't know that because I actually talked with several of them before we even started about the demographics piece. And so once you add the demographics piece to schema 12.1, it has a completely different story. And I think that is when several, once people started knowing about this, it was really then I think that people started really getting concerned. And I think, I've been in several groups before. I'm really focused a lot on education. So I've had several groups that have focused on education, especially with Latinos. And I think we had a unique combination of people in NEWLET. And honestly, that is what I think happened, is that if you don't have the right people to do this kind of work, it doesn't happen. I mean, other people do other kind of work, and that's wonderful. But in order to really mobilize, you need a very specific kind of a group that is almost self-selected. And I believe that's what ended up happening in our group.
Yeah, so that self-selection is really important, and having the right people, right? What does the right people look like? I'm just curious, because as I think about other people and sectors and issues that are occurring, how do you know when you have the right people?
I mean, the right people for this, I don't want to say the right people in general, because everybody's doing other work, correct? I think the right people means in this case that, first of all, if you look at the composition of the group that really worked on this, we're all leaders. Each one of us is a leader in their own realm, right? And they have that personality of being a leader, which means they're probably not scared to talk about things that they believe in, right? You have to be able to take that risk, because it's a risk, especially at the very beginning when nobody's talking about this. It's a risk to talk about this and to bring it up, and people will react negatively, especially as you mentioned, when people have not even thought of this, and they're not because maybe they were not even aware, but they might have not even thought of it. And when you start bringing up these issues, people react to them. And so if you're a leader, you need to be able to deal with that and that kind of rejection that comes from people hearing something that maybe is new to them. So I think that's part of it. I think the other part of it is a lot of energy. We had a lot of energy to be able to continue. And the fact that even despite whatever obstacles we had, we kept going. And I think that is in general one of the things that happened with this group, because it's hard to do this kind of work. And it's also hard sometimes with leaders, but I think we had a really nice combination of people who were leaders, but also got along with each other. And we were very different generations, different backgrounds, different professions. So it's really fascinating the way it came together.
Mm-hmm. And it was mostly because it was that shared, was it the shared vision of, or I'm not sure if vision is the right word, but you all were seeing the same thing. You saw the same issue of this is disproportionately impacting students of color and their family, and this isn't right. We've got to look at it through another lens, make sure that we have all the facts, right?
Exactly.
And then what?
I think that's one of the things. I'm going to let Gabby talk about it in a minute, but I just want to say, I think that one of the things that really happens is that the group in general has a really big desire to help the Latino community and the BIPOC community in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and really in whatever spaces they work in. So in a way, it's almost like saying we know that we need to advance this. Personally, I think that education is the pathway to success. And if you don't educate our Latino population, we won't be ready to take those leadership roles. So I am very, very committed to that. And I think others in the group are too. And that is, I think, what came together in this group. So I'll let Gabby also talk a little bit about it.
And if I could I'm going to interject one more thing, Gabby, before you get started, is that this is also the fastest demographic when it comes to our youth, right? So everybody needs to be listening to this conversation of what's going on, because demographics are changing quickly, rapidly, and I don't know, Doctora, do you know what, or any of you know what the student population is for Latino students in the U.S.? But I know it's the fastest growing demographic right now.
It is the fastest growing demographic. I don't know the actual number right now in the U.S., but I do know that Latinos are growing in number, and by they're already almost 20%, and they will be most likely the largest minority in about by 2060. Everybody's saying that, but it will probably be earlier. In Green Bay, Wisconsin, what we do know is that the district is right now 60% BIPOC and 32% Latino, but in 3 years, it will be the largest minority in the district, and then also in about 10 years, if the trends continue the way they are going right now, it will be over 50% Latino. So we do know these trends are happening. The other statistic, I think that's an important one, is a lot of universities right now are being challenged by declining applications due to fertility rates that are also declining. But the Latino population is one of the growing populations that's going to be applying to college. Already they are 20% of most college applications right now. So it's an important population, absolutely. No matter where you look at it, it's an important population.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, and I think that I would like to add, like, it's an important population, and it's also important that groups like us start forming, because we need to make sure that, we understand that the university is going to look at who's the next population that they should try to get in their institution. And so we need to make sure that if they're going to be committed to that they do have the spaces and resources available to make sure that, Latinos succeed in those spaces. But yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing for me in adding just briefly as to like how we came together, we're all established professionals. We all went through the public system. Most of us went through the public system and realized that we were not given the same opportunities as other people. And we knew those structures already existed. I think that the school district wasn't ready for us to come. I don't think they were thinking like there's already Latino professionals in these spaces that don't need or rely on the white community to create a reputation or a space to be invited in. We're all very established and have a good reputation. We put in the work. We've navigated these spaces. So I think at the end, we had a conversation, I remember, and we were talking with Gracia last night, and I was like, we know that the minute we start bringing up race, people are going to shut down. And the minute we start questioning and asking that, people are going to turn it around like they've done it before. And there's going to be spaces that are going to turn it around. And then they're going to be like, no, you're seeing things where it's not there. Gaslighting us like we've done, that's what happens. And so I think that we all sat down and are like, are we ready to put our reputation on the line for this? Because you had to. You were going to go in. You couldn't be nice and you couldn't be passive. You just couldn't. They were not listening. We were trying to be passive and they were just not listening. And so we were like, we got to go head on. And these Latinos professionals, us, we were like, let's go. I mean, what do we got to lose? It's more to lose our community, our identity, than it is to lose our own profession. So I think like one of the things I always highlight is like there's, different types of Latino. I'm not saying one's better than the other one, but there's one Latino that, or a type of Latino that always tries to push forward and reach that ceiling, the success ceiling, to be able to be that bridge for other Latinos to succeed. There's other Latinos, and it's completely fine, where it's like, I'm breaking the cycle of poverty. I am getting invited to these spaces and I'm not looking back. And that's fine too. We need that's everybody makes that decision. And I think in our group, we had all these Latinos that we saw each other as the bridge for the future generations. And we were willing to take on the pain and, whatever the experience we were going to live through. And maybe, like you said, right, we could have been burned. And so we were willing to commit and do that. So that's, I think, what helped NEWLET succeed to advance these conversations.
Yeah. Well, and it's so interesting because on my post when I was sharing about this, I was saying it's very easy to want to be, a DEI champion, a bridge builder, a community connector, a change maker. It sounds lovely, right? It sounds empowering, but the work is actually very difficult, and it's not always seen as in a positive light by others, right? And so some of you have, experienced this more difficulty around this. Amanda, just from our conversation before we got started, you were on the original task force. You were the only Latina on the original task force, and you started asking a lot of questions. And at some point it seemed like the perception was that you were no longer on their side, so to speak. Can you tell us a little more of that, and how that, like, and I want this to be a vulnerable and real conversation, because you have to know what you're getting into here. Like, how do you deal with that? You're being told, Gabby mentioned the gaslighting, right? That's real. Like, the good thing was that you kind of knew, you anticipated for it, right? But Amanda, how did you deal with it when they started kind of seeing you as this traitor, so to speak, and all of a sudden you weren't on their side?
Yeah, I want to go back to also how this group formed. I think through this process, we all realize that we're change makers, and we're not afraid to ask questions, to demand representation, because at this point, it shouldn't be acceptable to have one Latina on a task force in a district that is 60% diverse. I mean, we shouldn't even have to make that statement, that it should be representative of the students and the families that they serve. But I will say, I think using a phrase that they kept telling us when closing schools, they kept saying, well, change is hard, families will adjust, we will look at all of these other factors later on. But it's interesting when you challenge an institution and that change requires them or the institution to give up some power, all of a sudden change is not as easy, and it's hard even for them. So it is an uncomfortable feeling. I feel like many watching can relate to that when you start challenging systems in place that are oppressing certain groups or displacing families or displacing students, or anything that really is not equitable. You face backlash, you face criticism, you face I remember bringing up some points, and then board members or district administration or even community members were questioning, asking us questions as to, well, do you have your data? Do you have correct data? How do you know what the impacts are going to be? Closing a school is not that big of a deal. Families will adjust. A lot of these things. So yeah, it is uncomfortable. And I think the way that I've dealt with criticism just in general is that if you're, and I'm taking this, if anyone's familiar with Brene Brown as an author, she has a quote, the man in the arena quote, which I like to use. If you're not in the arena doing the same type of work that I'm doing, or doing the same level of advocacy that I'm doing for my community, the Latino community, then I'm sorry, but I'm not going to listen to your criticism. I'm not going to take it into account, because I know that what I'm doing is not self-serving. It's because I feel like I'm an ally, I'm an advocate, and I'm an activist for my community. And those are three separate things. And I don't get the opportunity to just take that hat off at any moment. I think activism and advocacy is a lifelong commitment. If you're only in it for a short period, I don't think you're in it for the right reasons. So I think all of us in this group, we're committed to that long-term vision. We're here to stay. We're going to keep monitoring how this develops and what the final decisions that are made. And they need to understand that as our community grows, our voice will just continue to get stronger.
You did have a kind of a milestone or celebratory win, because this hasn't been mentioned yet, but they did end up postponing the vote in order to collect more data because you were speaking up, right? And before we go into that, I don't know if one of you want to talk about how you, because all of this happened sounds like this has been happening a long time, but this was really, really quick. This was like in 3 or 4 weeks.
Yes.
You had to organize before a board meeting. And how did you do that? And how did you organize families who specifically would be impacted by these decisions? And how did you encourage them to use their voice in a board meeting? Because sometimes those are very intimidating places for people to be, even if you are. I've gone to a couple school board meetings, and I remember the first couple ones I was very intimidated just because it was not my element. Who was I to say anything? So how did you end up mobilizing in those 3 to 4 weeks to bringing in family members and students and so forth?
Well, I will say one thing, and then I think everybody has a piece of it. And in reality, again, I will have to say that everybody had unique talents to make this happen. So I think one of the things that I bring to the table as a professor is that I have to always look at complex information, which, by the way, schema 12.1 was pretty complex, and that is very hard to understand. And most people just looking at it very carefully will not be able to understand it. So I created a PowerPoint that really showed exactly what are some of the things that are happening in a very simple way, just very simple way, the way you would be teaching someone, because really you have to summarize, but also capture the most important pieces that are relevant. And I think that, but that alone is not enough, right? You have to be able to do something with that. And I know I showed it. That's where I say it was self-selecting, because I did show that PowerPoint to several different people, but there were certain people who really kind of thought, oh, wow, we can do more things with this. And so it's, what I wanted to do really from the very beginning is ask the board about, what is going on, because that was my whole point is, what is going on? Why are we closing these schools when the population is growing? Because the Latino population has grown in Green Bay, Wisconsin by 287% from 2000 to the present. That's a huge growth, right? It's been very rapid growth. And so they kept saying the population is declining, but it's not the Latino population that's declining. So overall, the student population might be declining, but the Latino population is growing and continues to grow even after COVID, which is really hard, right? A lot of times that did not happen with other groups. So I think that was important, is to say, yes, as we move forward, this is what I have, but then how do we do that? And I think talking with parents, that was useful, but I'll let Gabby talk about the parents, because I know that was really an important piece of that.
Yeah, and I think like Gracia's saying, and I think this is something I really want to highlight. If you're going to do this type of work, you better be ready, because people are going to ask you questions. And I always tell Gracia, she put in hours and hours and made it teachable to us. And then we're like, we got it. Let's go teach it to our parents. And I think anywhere I went, estaba con my bag, estaba con mi bolsa, and any person I will saw, I'd be like, do you have a kid in the district? Let's look at the map. What school does he go to? Let me tell you how this is going to impact him. You have to be able to answer those questions. If you're just saying like, oh, it's going to segregate people. Oh, it's not creating K-8s in the near east side. Like, they're going to ask you more and more questions. And I remember talking, like, when we were having these conversations with the white community, which is different than when I was having it with the parents. But when you were having these conversations with the white community, they were coming in with already saying the district is in the right. So then they would say like, but what about this? And I had to bust out my PowerPoint and be like, hey, well, this is what in reality schema 12.1 does, which you can't really tell because you have to spend hours and hours. And so I remember like shifting conversations where it was like, what can I do now to help you? And so I think I just want to highlight that you really want someone to be able to, or a couple people to be able to really understand what's going on and able to transmit that to the leaders, who then go out in the community, go out to their networks, go out to, the parents, and be able to transmit that same information. And I think that's something that was very effective in our group. And I think, all credit to Gracia, who trained us. And we were like, any question we knew, and it was the same message over and over. And I think that play a big, huge part.
And Gabby, did people understand what the impact was?
No.
I mean, because maybe they just thought, well, it's budget, so you had to take them and hold their hand. and kind of walk them through like, this is how it's going to impact us in the long term.
Everyone, any community, be like, what do you want the district to do? There's this $20 million budget deficit. And then I'll be like, okay, well, let's talk about that. And so then we would look at schema 12 and I will walk them through it. And by the end of that conversation, it was like, what can I do to help support you? And so a lot of it was hard. And one of the big things that stuck with me by one of, Steph, which is part of our NEWLET, was like, why do we have to keep explaining ourselves if we have a good reputation among these spaces? And why are they questioning everything we're doing instead of being open with or coming to this conversation with an open dialogue? It's not just random people from the street. It is professionals that have committed their time, energy, and working with the Latino community, saying to, the district, hey, just so you know, this looks bad. And but a lot of the conversations was like, the district's right. Why are you questioning them? And so we had to shift minds. But in terms of parents, the hardest thing for this was that parents didn't even know about it. They were not communicated effectively that their schools were closing. They learned that their schools were closing from their 6-7-year-old kid. Imagine putting a kid in that position where it's like, hey, my school's closing. Some parents were like, hey, you're getting a new school. And it's like, no, they're going to be transitioned to an overcrowded school. And so having to educate parents, and for them, it was like focusing on what's important to them. For them, it's not like the whole district. For them, it's like, how is this going to impact my kid? So being able to show them specifically, where does your kid go to school? This is how your kid is going to be impacted. And then after that, they'll be like, well, what can I do? And be like, we're going to hold your hand throughout this whole process. And when it came to speaking at that public forum where parents were able to participate and we all spoke on there, we said, we can speak on your behalf, but it'd be more powerful if you can speak. And we made sure that there was translators. And I was one of the first ones to go, and I did my speech in Spanish. And I made, and I had it ready for the translator. I wasn't going to put the translator through that because they were just summarizing. So I had it in English and the translator read it in English. And then after that, a couple of us more did it in Spanish. And then parents, you could just see the parents being like, okay, don't close the school, give me answers, and so we were able to get that. And I would like to highlight that I don't know if there's been ever, maybe you guys can correct me, but that much Latino participation, we were there, we were loud, we were noticeable. They couldn't I could tell the faces from the board were like, what is going on? That just happened. And so anytime a parent would speak,
we need to bring that to more places.
Yeah,
and
we were
spaces,
that.
Right? We need to do that more.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
So our voice is one of the most powerful tools there are, and those testimonies, I'm sure, it is partially what caused the pause for the vote, right? Is they needed more time to decide. Kind of switching gears here just a little bit then. So what I heard was making sure that you have thorough information that's, information that's complex is broken down into easy parts so people can digest it, that you really, know your stuff, and that you're, engaging all of the, stakeholders, so to speak, or whoever that is. In this case, it was the families, and getting families buy-in and families using their voices in these public forums. Anything else?
Amanda?
Yeah, I would say also we started, we also leverage social media. I think that's a part of any movement. And I remember someone in our group taking a screenshot of our page, which said no al 12, or going against schema 12. And I think our page, at the height of our mobilization, it was, talking to parents, it was reaching out, it was all of us using our collective influence and power in our own space to spread the word. And our intention was never to take that role. This really should have been the district doing this information sharing and making sure that it was available in multiple languages, including Spanish. So our Facebook page, at the height of our mobilization, I think we reached over 7,000 people. So that was just through word of mouth, educating some parents, which then told other parents. And then we started informing community stakeholders as well. And it just, I think by leveraging our collective influence, by using social media, by making sure we had information ready to go, and even amongst ourselves, we had to support each other, saying like, who's going to go to that event? Who's going to go to that church? Who's going to host an online event explaining what's going on? Some people were gathering signatures. Some people were trying to get the word out in different ways. So it happened very quickly, but it wouldn't have been possible without all of us working together and constantly communicating. It was always like, who's going to do what? Who's going to be present at this place at this time? And we also understand that any kind of change, it can't always be Latinos advocating for Latinos, right? We also understand that with any issue affecting communities of color, you need to have allies from different backgrounds joining your cause. So I feel like we all felt strongly about that, and we invited others in to our work. And I think there's more work to do in that space. But that's really how it came to be, and so quickly, because of all of those factors coming together at once.
Yeah, I will just add that other people who are not here, for example, Stephanie, she is part of the mayor's equity. What is it called? It's the
Equal Rights Commission.
Equal Rights Commission. And so that really made a difference, and that really brought in another group that really was supportive of our work. I think that we have also Rogelio Contreras, who has a radio, and he was part of the group, and he was able to really manage the marketing along with Janet Sandoval, who's just really excellent with a lot of the work on videos. And then Ileana is very, very good with research, and she's done she would find things that would be sometimes hard to find at the spur of the moment. Then we have Dr. Yolo Diaz, who also has done a lot of work with parents and families and really knew the community very well. So I think we had a lot of different people who had real talents in different areas that were able to bring it together and do some of the things that Amanda just mentioned.
Yeah. And now what's the next step? Where are we at now? When's the next hearing, and what will be decided then?
Well, one of the things I think that we're thinking of right now is we have already kind of divided our work for the next step. And I mean, this is, as we have all said at some point, is that we are all interested in this work, and we're going to work through NEWLET and also through other organizations if we need to. But through NEWLET, our goal is to really be present at the school board meetings, to be able to be present and see what's happening, because the work on the Latino community is so important. I'll bring up another issue that I think is really crucial. Part of the identity of being Latino is the language. And when you do not have the language, as we know from Native American populations, if you strip the language, if you assimilate everybody, people feel lost many times. And that is what happens a lot of times when there's no bilingual program or only an ELL program and no bilingualism, and people start losing their language and with that part of their identity, and they feel really lost. So I think as a community, we really have to advocate for very, very good bilingual programs in our community, because it is part of our identity of being Latinos. And that has been happening already for a long time, but it's probably a good time for us to, just like other communities of color have realized, that sometimes you have to go back and say, okay, this was done for many years, but now we need to stop this because our children need to know their heritage. I think that's an important piece of what we will be probably doing, among other things, as we move forward, because in a district that in 10 years might be a majority Latino, that piece of it is crucial to our identity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I would add is like we're definitely gonna be a resource to the board. I think anytime, like yesterday, for example, they had a board meeting, and it was interesting to see this. I'm still trying to process it, but they were coming up with a policy on how to make sure that they do not have the same situation of lack of representation in a task force. And so it was interesting listening to their conversation and be like, oh my God, you are completely lost. There were some very good ideas, but just listening, it's like, okay, maybe we need to be more of a guide to help them. And like I said, this is like, it's interesting that it's just happening right now, and there isn't a policy where you have a 60% diverse district, that it had not come up, you know, way before. But I think like what we're doing now, you know, the decision hasn't been made final of what schools are going to close, if any, and where are, you know, where K through 8s are going to be created. They're going to have a consulting firm, equity consulting firm, do that work, and then, you know, they're going to convene a new task force. And so you know, we're really pushing for some of our members to be on that task force. So I hope that we already provided the recommendation, and they name dropped us yesterday at the Board of Education, be like, NEWLET already provided their recommendations, you know, and so we need to have access to the community. And so there's community members. And someone, and this board member also said, like, you know, we really need to know these communities. You know, the communities we serve, the problem we can't figure this out is because we, you know, are not in these communities. So I think that was awesome to see that issue highlighted by this board member, because it is true. You got to know your communities, got to know the leaders, because one of the things where we got in a fight with them, and you know, is that they called out Casa Alba, because they said that they call Casa Alba, and that, you know, they weren't able to get a hold of Amanda. And it was during a time where we were like questioning a lot. And so they called them out. And, you know, I saw the white allies being like, well, Casa Alba isn't the only resource for Latinos, and coming to the defense. But it just gives you some insight as to how much work we really have to do. But it's just, that's our next step, is just making sure we're listening to these board meetings and guiding them through some of these processes where it might seem that they need a little more hold-handing.
Mm-hmm. And I think, just to summarize, I would say we're in it for the long term. I mean, very, very long term, we want to have more representation across the board, not only in education, in programming, in leadership positions in the district, not just teachers, not just monitors. We want to have Latinx representation at the decision-making levels in our district. And also long-term, and one of our members actually said this at a public forum. She said, well, if the board is not making the best decisions for our communities and our district, we are going to have to run for your positions. And that line really stuck out to a lot of people, not just us as Latinos, Latinas, but I think that it made the front page in our local newspaper, and for good reason, because that is really the next phase, is making sure that we are not only represented in decision-making roles in education, but in political spaces, in really any space. So very, very long term, we want to start encouraging Latinos to run for those board positions, to run for office locally, at the state level
of mobilization,
at the federal
right?
level. Like, when I say long term, that's our long term goal, is representation at all levels. And we are not gonna, although it's good to have that collective, there is power in collective mobilization, and we saw success in the work that we did. But this is just one issue. Imagine if we did this for every issue affecting our community. It would be a change. It would be a huge change. So that's the long term.
And I think Green Bay is small enough. That's one of the things I think that we have to realize. First of all, it's a place where we all know people, right? We all have white allies. We all have a lot of community members who support us. Green Bay is, in many ways, is very welcoming in terms of our community and helping our community. So we have a lot of allies, and I think it's possible to make a change. I think one of the dreams that we have is that we can make it almost like a pilot for what a good majority minority community can be like. And Green Bay definitely has everything in place to be able to do that, because it's small enough and everybody knows everybody. And so it's a very good community to be able to do this.
Yeah, well, it definitely sounds like there's some best practices that can't come out of it. And I'm just thinking out, like, how do you take those best practices and share them to other communities that might be experiencing the same things, right? Because again, when you're just looking at the data and looking at statistics, like this is not just something that's happening in Wisconsin, but happening all throughout the United States.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that is why it's really, first of all, the educational piece is important because it's happening in many places right now, but also because it is the pathway to success. So if we ever want to get to the point of being more in leadership positions, we can't ignore education, right? That is a really important pathway to success. And so I think we see that as a really crucial piece, but obviously there are so many areas, and we do see ourselves as agents of change and helping our community move forward. And I think several of us, because of Casa Alba has done a lot of work on foresight analysis, we really have a tendency to look at the future and say, what does the future hold? Like, not just right now, but 20 years from now, 25 years from now. And so how do we see ourselves changing in this spaces, right? How do we see our community and other communities changing in that period of time?
I think one thing I want to add is that NEWLET was not invited at all to the table. I mean, we were actually like, they were probably hoping we were going to leave, and we were excluded from spaces.
Okay, come on, Gabby, say this louder because.
So I know people are like, we got to get invited to the table. And I'm like, we weren't invited. We were loud enough with, with our backup, with our professionalism, with our reputation, and we put our reputation on the line with good data, and we pull up a chair. And then until they couldn't be like, go away, NEWLET anymore. So sometimes, even if you're not invited to the table, maybe you have to attack from different places until you do get invited from the table. If not, you just pull out a chair, right? And then it can happen. But we were not at all. We were excluded from the table.
Yeah, and I remember at one point an administrator said, "Who is NEWLET?" I don't know who NEWLET is. I'm not going to speak to NEWLET because I don't know who that is. And now we have board members mentioning us in their meetings. So that's just so you can see the trajectory, kind of just ignoring the fact that we had come together and we were advocating for our community. And now they're saying, oh, well, we really need to have a relationship with Latinos and to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And that happened because of our work and our mobilization, and because we're doing it to advocate for our families and our students, and they're at the heart of the work that we're doing. I think that's what has kept us motivated.
And there are over 150 Latino professionals in Green Bay right now. So I think that there are a lot of ways in which our community can make a difference in many areas right now. And I think we've done something that I think is really important. But as you said, it can be imitated by others. It can be copied. It can be improved. There are so many ways to do these things, but you have to take that risk. You have to say, yes, it's important to take the risk. It's important to know that we are in this for the long term, and that will make our community better.
And I think one thing it's really important to add, because our group went through it, is that we have to have each other's back. Because, if we say something and then they're like, well, it's just Gabby, and then they come after just Gabby, right? It's like, no, it was NEWLET, so we have to have each other's back in these spaces, because they, are going to pin you against each other. They're just going to go specific after just one person. And we have to, as a group, I think what we had this space where we're like, if they go after one, nos echamos todos, it's NEWLET. It's not this just one person. And I think another thing you always have to keep in mind is that people you thought were allies, true colors are going to come out when decisions like this, and when you ask them to be a true ally, they might not, show up. And you have to, I had to mourn that. And I had to be like, damn, I guess they're not really a true ally. And they might have the reasons, whatever, but I think that that's something you really have to prepare mentally, that's going to happen. Organizations, individual peoples you thought, were really true allies to our Latino community, to the bike pack community. When push comes to shove, their true colors do show up.
Yeah. What, with that being said, I think about again, everything happened within like a month. So there was a lot of work. You all maintained your full-time professional jobs and roles, and, family, and, whatever else that you have in your life, plus taking this on. How did you care for yourself during this process? And what, for other people that might be doing similar work or, DE&I work, what advice would you have in terms of taking care of yourself? Because, burnout in this work is real.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big question.
I think I'll start. I think there was moments. I mean, were there moments I cried? Yes. Were there moments I wanted to be like, F you, NEWLET? Just kidding, right? But like, were there moments that I was like, maybe NEWLET is not for me or something like that? Yes. And were there moments where we all disagree and it got pretty intense? Imagine having like, 6 Latinas, mujeres, all very like leaders and like opinionated. And then one male who's also like a leader. It was only one that survived us, todas las mujeres, dichoso, entre las mujeres. But there were moments difficult. And I think there was one time where I just shut down. And I knew myself enough that if I kept pushing, that I was just not going to say something that I later was going to regret. So what I did that day, I was like, yo, I'm busy all day. I'm not responding to any WhatsApp messages. I just took a day off. And I think I saw a couple people throughout these 4 weeks just taking a day off or saying like, I'm just going to take the weekend. I'm not going to respond to any messages. I'm not going to look at it because I need that time for myself. So I think it's being able to, for me, work is like know myself enough that when I hit my point where it's like, right now you're not being productive and then you're not advancing a productive conversation, you need to take a step back, that you just do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think what happens is you do get exhausted because the work, especially when you have to go very fast, and we have to go very fast to keep up with the district because they had very, very fast deadlines for everything. So if we really wanted to make a difference, we had to go very quickly and work really hard. So I think that the biggest thing is that, you have to be able to take time to rest. I think one of the things that I have that I think has helped me in many cases is I really try not to keep grudges. Even if I'm mad at one day, I will try to say the next day is cuenta nueva, borrón y cuenta nueva, you start again. So I think that's one thing that always helps me is that I immediately start thinking, it's another day, let's move on. So I think that in general, that helps a lot to be able to say, let's leave whatever happened behind and let's move forward. And always think that what we're aiming for is more important than us as individuals, especially when you're mobilizing. You have to say if the individuals are important, what we're looking for is really important. So we have to take care of ourselves, but nobody is irreplaceable, right? You have to always remember that everybody can be replaced, and as long as you're following the goals, that's what's important. And I think that's another thing to keep in mind as you're mobilizing.
Yeah, and I would say each of us, we all had high and low points, right? There were moments where it was time to celebrate and we said, yes, we showed up. They saw that we're a force, that we are going to continue to show up and advocate for families and bring awareness to these issues. And then we also had low points. So I remember my outlook, I try to be positive in any situation, even if it seems like it wasn't a win. I tried reminding the group, let's remember where we were just a few weeks ago or just a few days ago. Let's look at the successes that we have had. And honestly, sometimes I just did that for myself because I wanted to keep myself motivated and highlighting as much as we know that there's so much work to be done. This is just one example of something that we're advocating for. As a nonprofit leader that supports the community, there is so much work to be done. I just came from a session on housing rights in our city. So that there's a lot of work to be done in different spaces. But I agree that we also have to acknowledge that if we're not okay, we can't continue to do this work. And it's not easy, and it is a lot of time. I remember, I think a low point for me was knowing that I wasn't spending as much time with my children, which as a single parent, that I felt that guilt of like, okay, I'm doing this, I believe in this, but I'm also not spending time in other areas. But guess what? Sometimes I had to bring my kids along, and I wanted them to be part of those historic moments because they are the reason why I'm doing a lot of the work that I'm doing. It's for my children, it's for future generations, And if leaders don't make that decision now and step up, they're going to be the ones that are going to be doing this work 10, 20 years from now. So sometimes when I needed that motivation, I would bring my kids along. And that was like, I was looking at them as we were doing this.
Yeah, and they see that, they see it, and it's amazing, what they'll pick up. I have two kids, 10 and 16, and I'm a single parent, and I would bring my kids along to different meetings, and I serve on the Human Rights Commission in my county, and so they're at those meetings, or they used to go with me to Latina leadership meetings and sit while I had the board meeting, and all of that, like. It surprised me when they would say something related to it, and I was like, they were actually listening. I thought they were playing on their iPad, but they're actually listening. And so it's great to model also the importance of civic engagement, of being involved with your local community, of the the power of your voice, the fact that you can actually make change. I think that part of the I don't know what you want to call it, but like a lot or myth or a lie is that that we don't have that power to change anything. But each of you and NEWLET together has proved that when you use your voices, when you mobilize your community, when you engage your resources, there is power in that. There is power, and you're making a difference. And regardless of obviously we're hoping for the best outcome here. But regardless of the outcome, like now NEWLET has, it is becoming well known. Now the district's aware of, like there's eyes on them, right? These are elected officials, and we have to hold our elected officials accountable, right? And that's what you're doing, and you're showing people how to do that. So there's so many valuable lessons here. Nellie says, thank you for doing the work. And I just want to reiterate that. Thank you for doing the work and, making the investment in your community of Green Bay, Wisconsin, and also in the community, in the Latino community, in the BIPOC community. And it really does take everyone working together. It takes the allyship. This, is important. We can't just do it, siloed. We have to have those partnerships, and allyship as well is so important. Any last thoughts or any last thoughts about what's going on, or anything that you'd like to share for our audience in terms of maybe the greatest lesson that you've learned throughout this whole process over the last month or so?
I would say for me, it's that mobilization works, and that at this point we shouldn't have to demand representation, but that is something that can be translated into any work. If you're serving a community, you need to have the representation. That's just and also I think initially going into this and knowing I also studied political science and international affairs, and I know that an institution will not give up their power freely. And it's until people voice that they deserve a seat at the table in terms of the decision-making process. But that's not going to come easy. So, and it can't just be one person. It can't just be 3 people. You have to have community buy-in into this process. If this wouldn't have been successful without our parents and our students saying that, yes, we understand that this will impact us and we need more information, we need answers, we need to know how this is going to affect my family, we wouldn't have been successful without that piece. So initially, to be quite honest, I think for me, as just my mindset, my philosophy is that any change institutionally is hard, and it's not going to come easy. And I hesitated to even think that we were going to make a difference in the decision, and we did. But it took a lot of people, a lot of time, and a lot of energy to make it happen. So I would say that those would be my takeaways. Mobilization works, representation matters, and that if you believe strongly in something, that you do have the power to make a change. We all now consider ourselves change makers, and we want to continue to be a bridge between families and the administration and the board. And I hope that they see our engagement as a positive thing, that we're here to support this process. We're not here to go against, but just to use what we know and to use our collective power to influence their decision-making process. So I would say those are the top takeaways for me.
For me, I think one of the big things that I've seen Latinos and myself struggle with is networking. God, do I drag going to networking events? Because this is like, okay, another space where I might not be able to show off authentically, because then I'm just going to shut off people. And so for me, it was like, damn, you really do need to go to those networking events, and you really need to establish those connections. Because I was tapping into like connections that I was like, remember when you met me back in like 4 years ago? I see that, you have a connection to this person. Can you introduce me? And it was just, and it was the introduction. So I think like, as Latinos, we dragged and we try to just, remain in our circles, but we really need to start networking and going to these different events to meet, attorneys, to meet someone that might know the governor, someone that might know a judge, that, and it's really, really important to start connecting with people, because you just never know when it's going to be the day where you're going to be like, can you do an intro for me? Because I really need that person, and I don't know how to access that person without them blowing me off, or like, right? Well, they don't know me. So they're like, so I think that was one of my most valuable lessons. It's like, I have a responsibility now to still show up authentically, and I have to work through that in these spaces, and I'm willing to put in the work, because it's not going to be easy, but I'm going to put myself out there more so that I get invited to more spaces where if a Latino is organizing and reaches out to me and be like, hey, do you know the governor? Hopefully by then I'll be like, yep, I can just email the governor and name drop you and your costs. So I think that, that was a big, big thing, a big lesson for me to learn that I take away from this. So if y'all know anyone, I'm willing to be at that table and start name dropping.
That's huge, because so many times we think about networking only in, we're on LinkedIn, right? So we're thinking job searches or, career mobility, but we really need our network for so much more. And the key is to build your network before you need it. Right. And so building those relationships so that if something does come up, it's, readily available, and you're not scrambling and then, asking for something without ever knowing the person. So really investing, and I think some of us dislike the word networking, but we need to get over it. It's really building authentic relationships, building meaningful relationships. And that's the key for anything that we do, whether it's, professional, personal, everything happens in and through relationships.
Absolutely. I have just one thing that I would like to say in addition, is that I teach international relations, but I also teach human rights. And I think that this is some of the things that sometimes we forget, that to have a quality education is a right. It's a right that's recognized by the United Nations. It's a right that has been recognized by presidents of the United States. So we need to make sure that people have that right. And, whether it's a Latino person or any other person, they have that right. So we really need to work to make sure that those rights are respected. And I think the other piece of it is that sometimes there are structural factors that inhibit people from enjoying their rights. And I think that is where we really need to be able to be present and understand what they are, and be able to call them out and try to bring about change. Because a lot of times without those structural factors changing, you will not see a lot of change. And so I think that those are really important factors to think about as we move forward. So this was a really good example of how, by doing what we did, we called attention to structural factors that are impacting the district, aside from just doing the very nitty-gritty of what we were supposed to be doing. But in many ways, we are contributing to the global goals that the United Nations has. We are contributing to improving the conditions for the United States to remain a global power, because you can't remain a global power if you don't have people who are educated. So there are larger factors that are part of that. So I think it's always important to recognize that the context of which of the things that we work in. So.
Absolutely. And so for, I know we're wrapping up now because I know we're a little over, but it's such a good conversation. But if people want to learn more about NEWLET, and all of you are on LinkedIn, so feel free to connect with our amazing panel. I mean, you can see that there's a wealth of knowledge here. And then does NEWLET have a website too, or, Facebook page or social media handles?
We have a Facebook page, if I can talk. But I am the one that usually posts weekly on NEWLET on my LinkedIn, and I know that's where I usually put the updates, because it's interesting. I think you mentioned the amount of Latinos that use LinkedIn that are on LinkedIn but don't use it. But that was, for me, a lot of people, when I was posting this stuff and the updates and what was the struggles, reached out to me and were like, what do you need? I'm here for you, and people I didn't even know that were looking at us were like, hey, I saw your LinkedIn post. So I think we don't have a LinkedIn NEWLET page right now, but I am posting almost weekly on updates and what we're sending to the district. But we do have a Facebook page called, No al Proyecto 12. And that's where we update our parents and we update pretty much our community. Other than that, I think maybe reaching out to us. Amanda, I'm the vice chair of NEWLET. Amanda's the chair. And then we have our amazing Gracia, who's the researcher and the professor de nosotros. And then we have an email and phone number.
Yeah, so I just dropped the email up there so they can reach out to you. And again, everyone here is on LinkedIn as well, so you can reach out there. But I mean, this is, they've opened themselves up to connecting with you. And again, we need each other. We need to have unity to fight some of these fights. We need to have allies as well. So this is a great opportunity. And, I just want to thank you again for all of the work that you're doing. I think this is a really important issue of our time. I mean, education, we know that I was telling Gabby before that I started subbing at my son's bilingual school, and I was horrified to find out that the literacy gap that exists for Hispanic kids. And I just never looked at, I look at my son's report card and I think about how he's doing, but I never thought it in the larger context until I went and subbed. And I don't come from an education background, but as a parent, I noticed right off the bat, which students were having trouble. And mind you, COVID, played a factor because most of them were in, I think, first kindergarten when COVID hit and things like that. So that, but even to still see the disparity between the Hispanic kids and the white children was great. And then there was even the other minorities, but it was still the biggest literacy gap. And I was floored, and I thought, oh my gosh, how do I can't unsee this, right? And it's motivated me to get more engaged, because I think about our future, right? And the importance of education, the importance of being able to read. And so really, I mean, what you've demonstrated is that everybody has a role in this work, whether you're an attorney, a professor, working in the community, even, a parent, even if you're not in a professional role, it is all of our responsibility, and it really does truly take a village, and we need to work together in order to further advance, not just our community, but the greater, society as a whole. So thank you, Mujeres, for all of the work that you're doing, for being leaders. We're so grateful for us. And, we'll be looking, Gabby, for your post and finding out how this all turns out. And, we're wishing you and the students and families of Green Bay a lot of success, and hope that you get the outcomes that you're fighting for. So with that, we'll say good night. Thank you to everyone who's joined us, and I look forward to hearing your feedback. All right. Have a good one.
Gracias.
Gracias. Thank you.